trusting our cause is just, and having prayed for the fortitude to brave spiritual wickedness in high places, we citizens of America make this announcement to the shareholders of U.S. Corporation, including the City of London, the British Crown, and the Vatican, and their operatives in the media, government, and society. A second Declaration of Independence by the 50 United States of America. With the utmost respect and admiration for the founders of the original Declaration of Independence, the American people humbly emulate their thoughtful, measured response to certain perpetual and ascending tyranny and despotism. We too believe it is the moral obligation of those privileged with knowledge and opportunity to work on behalf of the people, that the people are served best when their benefactors choose unity over division, nationalism over globalism, sovereignty over submission, and liberty over oppression, that all human beings are innate in nature, that America was founded under God, that the God of America is just, peaceable, and tolerant, that our material rights as sovereigns come from God, and that our God given rights may not be revoked, suspended, negated, or abridged without due process. What distinguishes the Second Declaration of Independence from its progenitor is the object from which we seek independence. Regrettably, to our great misfortune, shame, and dismay, and despite the several warnings and accorded safeguards, the cabal of foreign investors and privateers have managed to gain possession of our land, our wealth, our labor, our well being, our future, and even our children. Even the children. Although history has become muddied with varied interpretations of cardinal events, including the surreptitious adoption of a second corporate constitution and the uncertain ratification of several amendments destructive to the people, it matters only that only one or more alien groups lay claim to America and its assets. Rather than speculate on motives and weigh unprofitably the biased accounts, unverifiable information, and plenteous theories and opinions, we engage a perfect solution, wherein we exact independence from all claimants, past and present, proclaimed, identified, or veiled. As such, the usurpers named in this declaration are representative and not specific or exhaustive, regardless of supposed ancestry, precedent, instrument, or process. Although simply enumerations, transgressions, and usurpations would suffice to justify insularity, recounting significant events reveals important facts that are missing from history. These forgotten facts add insight, perspective, and clarity, illuminating our best way forward. The inevitable Civil War destroyed America's economy, ripped families apart, and cast a questionable shadow on the future of a once promising nation. America was in trouble financially and needed a massive infusion of capital to get back on its feet. A cabal of nation building venture capitalists from Europe agreed to finance America's recovery, but demanded an active role in government to ensure their investment. In 1871, mired in debt, Congress worked out a partnership. In exchange for boundless financial support, the foreign investors would handle America's administrative needs. Although initially it seemed to be an innocuous concession, the consequences of allowing the nation-building venture capitalists to conduct America's business beyond the protections of the U.S. Constitution proved catastrophic. The investors quickly embedded operatives throughout the foreign-owned corporate government, and Washington, D.C. began serving the interest of America's financiers over the people. In 1871, America effectively lost its independence, and the nation-building venture capitalists became our new masters. By the early 1900s, the foreign investors that bankrolled America controlled the major newspapers and news services, enabling them to shape what is reported and how it is to be framed. They had to cover their tracks before being exposed and repudiated by the people. The nation-building venture capitalists worked to soften America's imperturbable, elevated system of government. The founders had formed a constitutional republic instead of a democracy, specifically to prevent citizens in the majority from oppressing those in the minority, by doing that what is best for their district or state. Rather than enforce the majority will, representatives serve all citizens equally, eliminating the noise, division, and violence intrinsic to democracies. Being in control of the narrative, the foreign investors ingeniously promoted the fallacy that America is a democracy, trusting that the deception would lead to unrest and chaos that would make America vulnerable, creating additional opportunities for infiltration and manipulation. In 1913, the foreign investors established the Anti-Defamation League to slander anyone who exposed them and their infiltration into American politics. In 1913, by way of the 16th Amendment, the foreign investors were granted the authority to tax the American people directly, something expressly prohibited by their original Constitution. That the people would willingly subject themselves to forced confiscation of their property, their labor, is illogical, putting the legitimacy of ratification in question. In 1913, by way of the 17th Amendment, foreign investors breached an important safeguard that protected our constitutional republic from infiltration by enemy forces. Previously, senators were statesmen, appointed by the respective state legislatures as a check on the House of Representatives, raiding the public treasury. Henceforth, senators would run as glorified House representatives, reducing to promising free public money and services for votes. The authenticity of ratification is unlikely because the state legislatures would not willingly surrender their authority to bridle the appetite of the people's house, nor would they accede to transfer more power to the federal government, opening yet another door for international bankers to buy the influence they need to further their grip on America. In 1913, the foreign investors gained control of our currency by pushing through Congress the Federal Reserve Act, establishing a foreign-owned central banking system, despite the dire warnings of President Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, and William McKinley. The Federal Reserve Act, passed with the help of compromised legislators between 1:30 and 4:30 a.m. on December 22nd, when most members were away on Christmas holidays. In 1920, Congress, by way of the Independent Treasury Act, turned over the U.S. Treasury Department and its assets, gold and silver, to the Federal Reserve, a central banking system owned by the foreign investors established in 1913. In 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations was formed under cover of advancing America's interests in the world. Fact: the Council of Foreign Relations is sponsored by the City of London and serves to advance the interest of the foreign-owned Federal Reserve by directing the President, Congress, and the narrative through operatives in their news and information networks. In 1925, the owners of the Federal Reserve formed the United States Corporation. Just 5 of 100 shares issued were identified with the balance of the shareholders of U.S. Corporation remaining anonymous. Yet the money trail leads to the City of London, the British Crown, and the Vatican. The tax dollars we send to the Internal Revenue Service go to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which are under their control. The official formation of United States Corporation set the stage for the transformation of America from a constitutional republic of the people to a corporation owned by foreign interests and their families. Over the next few years, the individual states were registered as corporations as well, making them franchises of U.S. corporation. Representatives and senators neither represent nor work for the American people. Rather, they are managers of United States Corp, and, as such, they are obligated first to serve its best interests. The President is not just the President of America, he's the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of United States Corporation. The abbreviated term United States was purposely used to represent both American and U.S. Corp to blur the distinction between them. Similarly, the original U.S. Constitution was quietly supplanted by an imposter corporate constitution that bears a similar name and appearance again to confuse and deceive the American people. Specifically, the Constitution for the United States of America was replaced by the Constitution of the United States, with the latter becoming the supreme law of America, the latter's corporate statutes becoming the supreme law of America. In 1933, the U.S. federal government declared bankruptcy, and President Roosevelt, its acting CEO, signed over to U.S. Corp, America, and its assets, including the people, their labor, and their labor. The bankruptcy of 1933 that was arguably unnecessary, ceremonial in nature, contrived and orchestrated without the consent of the people, completed the heist and transfer of America and its assets to the same foreign interest groups who own United States Corp. In the bankruptcy of 1933, United States Corporation forced the American people to surrender their gold in trade for debt notes called dollars, fiat currency that has no seal value and that is depreciated continually through inflation to where it is worth just 4 cents today. The bankruptcy of 1933 put the U.S. Corp in a state of emergency, allowing it to implement Admiral Law, made evident by the gold fringe around the American flag. When in a U.S. court courtroom, you are considered at sea and not a citizen of America. In 1936, U.S. Corp began issuing Social Security numbers to turn otherwise sovereign Americans into trustees of corporate factions and fictions, making our labor taxable, which would otherwise be unconstitutional. According to U.S. Corp, you are not a live man or woman, but rather a representative of a corporation in your name. In 1945, the anonymous owners of United States Corp founded the United Nations under the guise of spreading peace, civility, and humanitarian assistance throughout the world. The true purpose is to condition citizens to recognize an international authority, a first step in establishing their promised new world order, in which the U.S. Constitution is retired to make room for a universal totalitarian government. United Nations publications Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 reveal the New World Order agenda, calling for the end of nationalism, patriotism, private property, individual rights, the two-parent family, automobiles, air travel, and the right to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government. In keeping with their goal of sustainable development, they plan to reduce the population by over 90%, ridding America and the world of dissidents and useless eaters. The remaining useful servants are to live in coastal communities where they will be stacked and packed into micro apartments. U.S. Corp began issuing Social Security numbers to turn otherwise sovereign Americans into trustees of corporate factions, making our labor taxable, which would otherwise be unconstitutional. According to U.S. Corp, you are not a live man or woman, but rather a representative of a corporation in your name. The only thing standing in the way of their NW